Booktube, it's Amy. I thought I would sit down and continue on with my video series about Proust. If you'll recall, in the winter I had begun a series of videos as I read through Proust's massive work In Search of Lost Time, and in March or April I made it to approximately halfway through Volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah, and I left off there wanting to read something else because I had essentially been reading nothing but Proust for a month and a half at that point. And so this past weekend I picked up and finished Volume 4, Sodom and Gomorrah, which I think was my least favorite volume that I've read so far. Another note here, I realized that my Friday Reads was really echoey, the sound echoed, and it's going to echo in this video as well, and there's really nothing I can do about it until I buy some more furniture, because I'm sitting in essentially a big empty room. Now, I've got bookshelves all behind me, but in front of me there is essentially nothing. There is an exercise bike, a fan, and a small side table. So, echo, that's going to be a thing, and I hope you'll bear with me for possibly the next month or two of videos until I'm able to afford some furniture here. But that aside, Sodom and Gomorrah. So, Sodom and Gomorrah is generally seen as sort of the descent into hell, the descent into darkness. But of course, biblically, Sodom and Gomorrah is a city that God destroyed in the Old Testament because they were immoral. And growing up, it was generally understood that part of the reason they were immoral is because they were in homosexual relationships. And Sodom and Gomorrah is largely about our narrator's realization that not everyone is straight. And what emerges here is essentially a double standard. Our narrator has a double standard. He's essentially tolerating of male homosexuality. He realizes that M. de Charlus is gay, and he is having relationships with young men. And despite having this realization and feeling a little bit shocked, he continues to associate with M. de Charlus and in fact becomes a close friend of his. But he reacts in a very different manner to the realization that there are young women having relationships with other young women. He is doing his best to avoid associating with women who have relationships with women, with lesbians, with bisexuals, whatever you want to call them here. But it doesn't end there. Not only does he not associate with lesbian women, but he does his best to ensure that the women in his life don't come anywhere near those women or even have conversations with them. There's one scene where he sees some young women that he knows, and because they have entered this dining room with a young woman who is known to have a lesbian relationship, he refuses to acknowledge their presence because he is with his young lover, Albertine. And what he starts to suspect over the course of this volume is that Albertine is herself either a lesbian or bisexual or whatever term you want to put on it. He realizes that she is attracted to women, but he doesn't quite see it as her fault entirely. He seems to subscribe to that very old-fashioned view that Albertine must be protected, that she can be moral as long as she doesn't act on those desires, and she won't act on those desires if she is not seduced or corrupted by corrupt women. And so he is doing his best to police her comings and goings and to police her behavior to ensure that she doesn't enter into a relationship with a woman. And of course he's not very successful because we get hints that she is meeting women behind his back. And, you know, the relationship between him and Albertine isn't exactly clear. We understand that she is his mistress, but does she love him? I mean, it's hard to say. He is someone who enters her life, and they are friends at first in one of the earlier volumes when they meet at Baalbek. And she doesn't really show a sexual interest in him. It is her friend Andre who seems to be in love with him. And he even considers Andre for a minute, but ends up through, circumstance and happenstance going for Albertine instead. And she rebuffs his advances at first. There's one scene I talked about in one of my earlier videos from one of the earlier volumes where she in fact threatens to pull the bell and scream if he doesn't leave her room, because she doesn't want to have sex with him, even though he thought that's why he was being invited to her room. But things change a bit once he meets her a year or so later, and once it's hinted that he started to spend some money on her. He is buying her clothes and giving her extravagant presents, so it's unclear whether she's really in love with him or whether she is recognizing that as someone who doesn't come from money, this is a pretty sweet deal for herself. For a single, orphaned young woman with essentially no one to take care of her and no present marriage prospects. And through conversations in this volume, Sodom and Gomorrah, we understand that she doesn't want to marry our narrator. She has no illusions about that. In fact, she urges him to actually go and marry this fictitious woman that he's made up in an attempt to gain her sympathy, and also sort of in an attempt to potentially have an excuse for leaving her. He is 100%, or let's say 95%, ready to leave Albertine, and he even muses about declaring his love for her friend Andre, who he has shown interest for in the past. But all of a sudden he has this definite realization that Albertine is at risk of being, quote, corrupted, that she is attracted to women, and suddenly he decides that he absolutely must stay with Albertine, and he decides that he absolutely must marry her. Not because he really seems to love her, because obviously he was about to run off and try to seduce another woman, but it seems he has kind of this complex in his mind that he must save her, and he compares Albertine in his mind to, kissing his mother goodnight. He kisses Albertine in one scene for the same reason, with the same emotion that he needed to kiss his mother goodnight in volume 1 of In Search of Lost Time. And so there's this weird parallel between his affection for his grandmother and for his mother, and now for Albertine. It's certainly not a sexual love. At one point he even admits that he no longer really finds Albertine pretty, and yet he must marry her to save her. Not only that, but I think he wants to marry her because perhaps his pride has been hurt. He realizes that, she's not head over heels in love with me. She is sneaking off to meet with these women. And so he continues to declare his love for her, and declares to his mother at the end of this volume that he's going to marry Albertine, almost, I think, out of a sense of wounded pride, out of a sense of possessiveness, which the next volume that I started in on this weekend as well is called The Captive and the Fugitive. And so you would guess here from the title that Albertine is the captive, and she may be the fugitive as well. Perhaps our narrator himself is the fugitive. Perhaps he's the captive, if you look at it in certain ways. Although at this point I would definitely say that Albertine is the captive, because when we move into the start of this volume, volume 5, Albertine is now living with our narrator, and he is essentially keeping her hidden away from his friends. He has brought his mistress into his home, and she is now heavily policed in terms of her comings and goings. He wants to know where she's at every moment of the day. He wants to know who she's with, and if she's away from him, he wants a full account of what she did and who she saw. And he really only trusts her to leave the house when she is with Andre. And even at the beginning of this volume, he's still harboring feelings for Andre, despite, asking her to chaperone his mistress. Although, my suspicions are that Andre and Albertine may in fact be in a relationship. Perhaps he's really just sending Albertine off with her lover for the day, but that's not confirmed yet. But overall, it's just become, a very different read. It's not that light, playful critique or satire on society that the earlier volumes were. Now it's become something very serious and something, in fact, almost a little bit sinister. Our narrator is not someone you'd want to meet. In fact, he's almost someone that, I think I would describe him as emotionally abusive, because he is very controlling of Albertine, and he is, demanding an account of where she's at and who she's with, and gets extremely possessive and jealous whenever she is not in the room with him. And now that she, at the beginning of this next volume, has moved in with him, it's not on an equal footing, or even like on the footing of a guest. She has essentially come, and she is almost occupying the role somewhere between guest and servant, because it is understood there are certain conventions that she must follow. She is not supposed to make any noise before our narrator gets up in the morning. She is not allowed to enter his room or speak to him until he rings his bell in the morning and sort of announces the start to the day for the household. So she is very much a captive, and I'm hoping that she finds a way to extricate herself from this situation, or that perhaps our narrator wises up and realizes that he is not behaving in a very good way towards Albertine or towards anyone in his life. He is living a life of privilege and is essentially behaving as a bit of an asshole at this point. But despite all that, it's still an interesting work to read, still something I'm going to continue with, and I'm hoping that this next volume, The Captive and the Fugitive, is very good. I'm hoping it ups itself back up to the level of the previous volumes. Within a Budding Grove was very good. Oops, I just knocked my tripod. I really liked Within a Budding Grove. I liked the third volume here. What was the third volume called? Sorry, it's been a while. I'm just going to look down here to jog my memory. The Gramonte's Way. I liked the Gramonte's Way. I liked Within a Budding Grove. I liked Swan's Way. Sodom and Gomorrah did take a little bit of a dive for me, down to, I guess I would call it the 3-star level. It was still a good book, but it didn't blow me away on an emotional level and on a artful level, I guess I would say, as the previous volumes did. We still had some of those, those delightful critiques of society. There is one quite funny scene in here where he is dining with a woman in society, a woman who is perhaps trying to put on airs to be seen as someone above her station, and she takes it onto herself to believe that Saint Loup is pronounced Saint Loup. So instead of Saint Loup, she's saying Saint Loup with a very hard P. And some of her followers begin to mispronounce Saint Loup's name as well with that Saint Loup. And instead of accepting the correction that is given to her by people who actually know this man, she continues to mispronounce it until she is, crossly, you would expect, crossly corrected in the society of someone who is above her. And then, of course, her admirers and followers slowly shift the pronunciation as well. And so it's this, this leader and follower. Whatever the leader says, then we must do that too, that sort of thing. And at one point, our narrator offends someone by coming up with various excuses why she can't join him and Albertine on their next trip. He wants to be alone with Albertine, but he makes up several excuses, and she keeps trying to press her society on them to the point where she becomes quite offended. And there's another scene as well where he meets someone in higher society, someone who would have been quite advantageous to him. And this person says to him, oh, that's the Duc de Charlus. And our narrator, knowing better, says, that's not the Duc de Charlus, that's this person, and I know him. And by correcting this person of greater station, he has essentially cut off any chance of having a friendship with him. It seems to be implied that he should go along with this person's misconception simply to be polite and to gain their favor. And so we continue to have these absurdities of society drawn out throughout this volume. But as I said, I'm looking forward to reading more of The Captive and The Fugitive. I'm not going to continue on with it right away. I kind of diverted my attention to a Graham Greene novel. It's my very first Graham Greene. I picked up Brighton Rock, which I think it was mentioned in a recent video, perhaps by Alan Morton. He's been doing this great series called 10 British Novels. He posted on Sunday. I think he's at the 1930s or the 1940s now. He does, 10 British novels from this decade. So he started out with 1900, and I would assume he's going to work up to 1990, perhaps even to 2000. But it's a great series, and so far I've seen some interesting novels that I haven't read yet. And so I picked up this one, and I'm about 90% sure that's where I heard it. If not, I'm dreadfully wrong, but at least I've told you about an interesting series that you can check out. So I hope you all have a lovely day and enjoy your reading.